The Legion's Exorcist, a novel of God's Legion, by J.T. Dowdy. Chapter 2. The Most Holy of Holies has blessed you with a bountiful harvest, which you have grown from the seeds of faith. You have put your trust in our Lord to see us through these troubled times, and he has rewarded you 1,000-fold. Now it is he who requires your trust, lest we all be swallowed by darkness. He has sent his children to lead you, to guide you, to use your bodies, which have been trained to their peak. Trust our benevolent Lord. Trust in his children. You will be required to leap from the cliff like Fresselok into the abyss in the coming moments. You must not shirk from this solemn duty. One of the standard devotionals of the Host Ascendency priests before battle. Norman Kant had never ridden in a Legion gunship before. They were called gremlins for their ubiquity and persistence in delivering both men and ordnance where needed, while using the light-bending technology all Legion tech used instead of painted camouflage patterns. They were made to carry a double contubernium, or 20 men instead of only ferrying 10. The reason was simple. In the lengthy transit times from orbit to a planet's surface, seconds mattered. If every gremlin could carry a full extra complement of men with them, then redundancy was met in the case one was shot down. A gremlin was an elongated cylinder when in space with side doors that would mold themselves into the hull when not needed to keep a breathable atmosphere, thanks to the Legion's liberal use of nanomachines. Once in a planetary atmosphere, stubby wings which mounted various weapons would extrude themselves. Each craft was powered by powerful agrav drives for use around ships or atmospheric flight, and when in the void, they would switch over for space-time warping engines for faster-than-light speed. They were not graceful or elegant, since they were designed to be used, abused, then remade from whatever was left. Norman was shown by the Angel Frigg how to work the overhead safety bar, which ratcheted down to secure him in position. The couch was made for someone wearing the Legion's powered armor, and so left a lot of free room for the priest to bounce around, forcing him to cling to the bar. The Aesir angel took up a position on his right, while the angel of his faith sat on his left. "Your Eminence," Norman asked, after the rapid acceleration ceased crushing his body as the craft left the planet's atmosphere. "What is all of this? I don't understand what is going on." "A very long question and answer," the host angel said. "Before I explain, you should know this. I should have had the Inquisitor killed, even though she was following the dictates of her faith. She will return to heaven and give her report, and Raphael will claim you are a traitor to the faith and excommunicate you. His Holiness is off assisting the Legion Master and his siblings with the war against Creator Baal, and so Michael will naturally hand down a death sentence for you. Possibly me as well, since he outranks me and has more support from the archangels." Norman's stomach lurched, and not from any perceived acceleration, as the gravity of the angel's words hit home. His life was effectively over. "I don't understand," he repeated. Elilith sighed and stuck her exquisitely toned legs into the aisle to cross them. "Elohim assigned me to this group after I came across ideas which I was not supposed to come into contact with, as it went against his dictates. Oh, he knows the real truth as well as I do now. But the faith is designed to keep our society running by painting to the Legion as the great evil. According to what I learned, according to what I have seen, the Legion Master chose to allow his nation to be seen as evil, so that ours would have something to reference and show moral good. The Legionnaires are not evil like you have been told, neither is their society. Strange to us, sure, but not evil. Captain, I did not ask that." "No, but you need to know this before I tell you the next part. Our group was asked by Elohim to find corruption in the heart of host society and government. This is why we are such a diverse group, to provide different perspectives to individuals and their retinues when we judge their loyalty to the Host Ascendency. What we have been finding as we slowly work our way inward is something we didn't expect. We have found many corrupted individuals and groups, and a disturbing amount of them have been looking for someone. Your son. The exorcist's mind lurched. I don't have a son, Captain. We do not know if this is true. However, the corrupted claim you do. They claim his name is Janus. Did you not give this name to him at his birth? I am told this is a standard mortal custom. Frigg chimed in. How many women have you slept with? We can start by narrowing down the list. Norman's heart was pounding as his mind raced, as everything was coming too fast for his brain to process. He said, My order takes a vow of celibacy. This is not the time to hide the truth, kid. Elilith already told you that you have no place with your backwoods people anymore. You have no reputation to protect now. And if you do have a son out there, you owe it to him to protect him. Even we know family is important, though none of us can sire children. Norman closed his eyes to think through the memories of his long life as he breathed deep to calm the raging storm in his mind. There were many pleasure women he had sinfully slept with when he was supposed to honor his order's vows of celibacy. There was only one woman he could remember, depositing his seed in by accident. Finally, he said, Emerald Forest. There was a woman on Emerald Forest of St. Matthew the Blind who might have had my child. I can't think of any others, but one. The ancient battleship which served as Baphomet's flagship was a full 30 miles long. This single ship served a multi-purpose role as both a fleet anchor and planetary assaulter. It bristled with so many weapons, most admirals of lesser nations would think twice before engaging it in battle. The Julia was nothing special in terms of Legion hardware, but it was home for some. Baphomet was the first to step off of the hovering gunship down to the deck plating, and the moment his boots touched down, a pair of powerful arms wrapped around him in a crushing embrace. Norman stared awkwardly around him in the cavernous main hangar bay of the enormous floating city. Thousands of gremlin gunships sat in vast overhead rack systems with crisscrossing ladders and gantryways leading to them, ready to deploy at a moment's notice after their pilots and troops embarked. An almost equal number of armored vehicles sat in neat rows, while technicians and crews tinkered incessantly with their machines. On the distant back wall, many 400-foot-tall bipedal war machines stood anchored in their cradles, with several smaller ones next to them. One of the smaller machines was making its way back to its cradle as sinuously as any trained dancer. Tanks, motorized artillery, fighters, bombers, and a whole host of other machines were all in their berths, with technicians swarming over them to ensure they would operate at peak performance when needed. The exorcist rubbed his eyes to make sure he was not dreaming. This one Legion warship housed an army, seemingly equal to a host guardsman expeditionary force. You should try being on the receiving end of this crap, kid, Frigg rumbled, as he too stared at the far wall housing the titanic bipedal walkers, as if reliving bad memories. I can tell you from personal experience, it does not end well. Truth, Sedgwick agreed, then grimaced and scratched at a phantom itch on her chest, as if going past her daily allotment of words was painful. Norman looked to the woman who had just let go of Baphomet. She was perfectly ordinary, despite her slightly too tall legs, which were hidden by boots which laced up to her crotch. Instead of the standard purple colonial jacket, she wore a vest of eye-searing pink brightness, and her long brown hair was pulled back into a ponytail, so tight it pulled the skin of her forehead back to give her a wide-eyed expression. "Who is she?" Norman asked. Though he desperately wanted to be in his home and not be stuck in this current situation, he was smart enough to understand his old life was over, and he had better make the best of his current circumstance as he found a way out of it. "That's Julia, kid," Frigg answered. "She is both herself and the ship we are standing on. I would be careful around here since she is so nosy as to be considered perverted. Nothing you say or do on this ship is ever private, and I truly mean nothing." "What?" Norman asked. Machines were just machines in his society. He had no frame of reference when dealing with artificial intelligence other than the rebellions they always seemed to cause in hollow movies. Lilith laughed as she clapped the exorcist hard enough on the shoulder to buckle his knees. Her people downloaded their consciousnesses into machines so long ago. Even I do not remember when exactly that was. Don't worry, she is not an AI. While her body is synthetic, her mind is more like a machine than yours. She can perceive information at effectively the speed of light. Have no fear, you are safe here. Baphomet and Julia finished their conversation and began walking back towards the group, holding hands absently. "That's allowed here?" Norman asked the giant, which was the more personable of his newfound companions, and their brief trip to orbit had built a budding respect for the angel. The giant was not a mortal, but he had the more mortal personality of the group, minus the taciturn legate. Norman had been training with the host military since he joined the seminary, and this was something he had been told was wrong for so long he did not question it anymore. Do not fraternize. The giant followed the priest's gaze and shrugged. They do not have the same rules as the rest of us? What? Lilith asked, then saw what the two were looking at. Oh, that. No, we do not have any rules regarding officer-subordinate relations around here. Remember, we are in all of the dimensions besides the first and second, and in more universes than I can comfortably count. We field more beings of spirit than all of your militaries put together. No such rules would ever last a day around here. All we ask is that everyone does their job to the best of their abilities. The female creator then looked to Baphomet and Julia and asked, "So, how do we want to do this?" The Legion legate cast a sidelong glance at the woman on his arm, before looking to Norman and grinning by playing into the stereotype of the evil Legion. "I talked her out of orbital bombardment. She wanted to." He was cut off as one of the pointy boot heels on Julia's foot ground on top of his arch. "Never mind, it was him who originally said to hell with it in the first place," Julia added in a squeaky nasal voice. The synthetic being's eternal brown eyes, which never blinked, swiveled in their sockets to stare at Norman. "So you are the one we blew our cover for." We could have been done with this nonsense by now had the old man not taken an interest in you for some dumb reason. But oh no, we had to move slow and wait for you to be born and live the life required to be put into this predicament. "Guns blazing or no?" Lilith asked the group, stopping the sentients from going on a tangent and confusing their lost mortal even more than he already was. The legate and his sentients shrugged in an almost identical fashion and said, "Don't care." "Frigg?" "You already know my answer, my lady." Lilith rolled her eyes. "Sejet?" "Quiet," the near-silent angel said to the surprise of no one. "Elolith?" The host angel snorted as she shook her head. "It would be smarter to stay hidden as long as possible, which should be all of about 5 minutes after we land, because the menfolk want to show off." As Lilith turned to look at Norman, the exorcist's mind lurched drunkenly into motion. It took him several heartbeats to come to the conclusion the group of immortal killers in front of him were deciding on a course of action to find his supposed son by a general vote. The exorcist did not know what to say or what to do. Angels in his society did not ask mortals for their opinions. They simply decided on a course of action, and it was up to the mortals to carry out their orders, whether correct or not. Norman still had no clue what was going on. He had been roughly informed his life was over, and that he would be accompanying a group comprised of angelic beings. A lifetime of conditioning told him only one of them in the group was a true angel, as only his faith had angels. Though the rational part of Norman's mind told him he knew better than that. He was in a strange place with strange people, but he had not been alive for almost 300 years in scary situations by being rigid and inflexible. He would roll with these new developments he could do nothing about until he could leave and go home. Lilith took a coin from her pocket and said, "Too slow, priest." She flicked it with her thumb high into the air as it spun end over end to land back in her palm. She then flipped it on the back of her other hand and gestured to Frigg with her chin. "Heads we do it the fun way," the Aesir angel replied with a fierce smile. As the concealing hand was lifted, Norman could have sworn he saw the head side of the coin facing up, but when he blinked, it was tails. Sejet smirked in silent triumph as the hulking Frigg groaned audibly as an overhead rack of small craft began to turn like a laundromat's pulley system. The ship, which was eventually lowered to the deck, was a dilapidated scow of an orbital transport with rust on it from where it had stayed in a damp place with oxygen for too long. Sejet and her Aesir counterpart reflexively took a step back from the death trap, while Lilith shook her head and said, I don't think this turd is what we had in mind when we meant quiet Julia. God's lust, look at the hideous thing. Those engines will probably scream so loud they will wake up half a continent." "Well," the sentience replied, uncaring as she would not have to ride in it. "It is the only host shuttle I have in stock, so deal with it." "Just restock the gremlin," Lilith said, beckoning to Norman to follow her. "We're not taking something that looks like an Empire junker. There is someone I want Norman to meet. We might as well get the worst of his shock out of the way now. Come along, priest. You have questions, and I'm going to show you to the answers." To Norman, the inside of the Legion vessel was a maze of passageways and corridors. Though the walkways were less cramped than on a host vessel of equal class, the number of sailors and soldiers endlessly moving up and down the corridors was crushing. It must have been shift change, as many of the sailors and soldiers looked haggard as they made their way to the numerous galleys and cabins. Blindly following his guide through the labyrinth, the exorcist took the time to watch and observe this supposed creator in front of him. According to his own people's mythology, Lilith was the first wife of the first man, who was cast from paradise for disobeying her husband and God. Yet, the woman he now followed was the very definition of civility, though he knew better than most how deceptive some of the smarter demons could be. He did have the scars on his body to prove it. He did not trust the heretical legion or its people and their backwards religion. A worrying fear was growing in his subconscious, because they are all absolutely serious. Having the angel Eloleth nod her head and confirm what everyone was saying to him was hard for the exorcist to ignore. The other thing the exorcist noticed was the soldiers and sailors who went out of their way to acknowledge the supposedly ancient being guiding him. They did not fawn and scrape pitifully, as he had seen most mortals do in host-controlled space, and he himself was guilty of such actions in his youth. They acknowledged her position and authority in a dignified manner, and Lilith went out of her way to greet them as she could, whether she knew them personally or not. It was not just her, as the Legion warship was filled with all manner of the typically towering angels, and most all of them seemed to genuinely care about the mortals under their command by the brief interactions Norman could see. Unlike the host angels who viewed mortals as tools to be used and thus treated them as such, finally, Norman worked up the courage to ask the woman a question, though he had to yell over the noise in the corridor. "Would you answer my questions truthfully?" "What makes you think I have not been doing so this whole time?" came the towering woman's reply. The exorcist was committed now and pressed forward into the unknown. "During the ride up from the planet, your answers to my questions sounded more like evasions." Lilith fist bumped a sailor as he passed her by. "Your problem, Norman Kant, is that your life is so wrapped up in religious fervor due to your upbringing that you cannot see the forest for the trees. To truly find faith, one must start by asking the right questions. Unfortunately for those in your shoes, the nature of religion itself is one of abstract thought. I pity you, because you and those like you live in a society which has cultivated faith to be more concrete, so those who claim to speak for God can milk you for all the shekels you are worth." "Blasphemy," Norman responded automatically, though he suspected the woman was correct based on what his heart and gut have been telling him for a little over 50 years. "That's what I mean. You people constantly twist words and obfuscate the truth. You heretics fill mortal heads with false teachings and ideas to tempt them down dark paths. Who else can we turn to hear the word of God?" "Incorrect, Norman. We of the Legion take a more philosophical and theological view to our religion. We pride ourselves on being able to debate our beliefs with logic and reason without resorting to calling people heretics for having a difference of opinion or blasphemous for speaking their mind. You know, you could just ask God questions if you know where to find him. His opinion might be different than what a mortal clergy member has." "Your people lack faith," Norman argued. "If you heretics have a difference of opinion on the teachings of your church, then it clearly has inferior teachings, which allow its members to be influenced by temptation." Lilith stopped in the middle of the corridor, to where Norman almost bumped into her. She ran her hands over her face as she stared up at the overhead deck plating. She was mumbling to herself, "Oh, just get a protégé, Lilith. Your work will be so much easier, Lilith. Well, I found him, and now I have to spend my time teaching from the beginning. At least he likes to argue about faith. This wouldn't work if he didn't." Norman had no idea what she was talking about, and was about to protest when Lilith snapped her fingers and time froze to hold everything suspended in the in-between moments of now and then. The exorcist's muscles were frozen in place, including his lungs and eyes, but he could see what his eyes saw and hear with his ears in the now silent corridor. A male voice he was unfamiliar with called out from seemingly everywhere at once. "Oh, come on, girl. Have a heart on a guy. Just because I did this to you the other day does not mean you have to return the favor." Lilith answered the voice in a matter-of-fact tone. "I need your help explaining things." The disembodied voice snorted. "You know practically everything I do, and yet you can't find a way to explain it to one lost host priest. Quit complaining and come help me. Need I remind you this was all your idea in the first place?" "Fine," the voice said with a sigh to sound as if he was in the middle of something important and had been continuously interrupted throughout the day, so that he was never able to finish his task. "Take him to the field down one level. I'll be there in about 5 minutes. Lilith grunted and began walking as time started flowing again. And Norman didn't trust what would come out of his mouth after witnessing a miracle the likes of which he saw only once as a young child. He followed the now obvious creator down a set of wide ladders into what looked to be a large sports arena. Julia's crew were availing themselves of various machines and games, and there was a lone individual who was reclining as best he could on the metal seat, as if taking a nap on the bleachers off to one side. "I swear," Lilith muttered to Norman, "he acts like this is such a chore." "Who is that?" Norman asked, eyeing the seemingly sleeping figure. He gave the clear impression of a being of spirit. Though dressed the same as most everyone on the ship, the figure's clothing was sun-bleached and tattered to an almost unrecognizable state. The clothing was familiar to the exorcist, as he had seen it many times before on the Hollow, as actors portrayed the most evil being in existence as some salivating, incompetent fool out to steal the faithful souls. Norman knew who this had to be, yet refused to believe it, despite being on a Legion warship next to a Legion creator. "Who do you think it is? You are confused, lost, and more than a bit angry. You have questions, and I think it is better you get the answers you are looking for from the one best equipped to explain. I am sorry, but the conversation you need to have would be best coming from my father's lips. I could tell you, but you would probably never believe me. We will be counting on you, and cannot have you making foolish decisions due to indecisiveness or mistrust." A pair of sweating legionnaires wearing workout clothing came jogging around the track next to the napping figure, and one raised his hand and called out, "Been a long time, my lord." The leader of the largest nation in the known universes and dimensions raised his head and waved back. "Samuel," he called back, acknowledging the mortal as if he knew him personally. "How's the new wife?" "She nags worse than the old one. Oh, we're having a baby next month." The figure gave a thumbs up and called to the retreating pair. "Congratulations. Send me an invite to the party and I'll be there if I can." Then the eternal silver orbs of the Legion Master turned to stare straight at Norman Kant, and the exorcist felt a weight on his soul which seemed to crush him like the universe's heaviest lead blanket. Norman's vision tunneled to stare at eyes which burned with silver flames as the individual spoke in his mind like the clappers of a titanic bell. "We are running out of time, priest. I really need you to start paying attention to what my daughter and the others are trying to tell you." Norman had undergone extensive psychic training to block all forms of mental assaults. He had been subconsciously chanting the litanies of protection in his mind, while envisioning a solid white sphere around his body which would be impervious to psychic assaults. With his mind protected by the best teachings and training of the true faith, he answered the voice in his mind. "Get thee behind me, demon!" The disembodied voice sounded amused. "Oh, that's cute, priest. The old perfect sphere trick. Gasp. Whatever shall I do?" As the mental pressure receded from his mind, the exorcist breathed a moment of triumph. Demons capable of speech always loved to boast about their abilities, but they were ultimately nothing when compared to the faith of a senior exorcist. As he was lowering the mental shield, he noticed a small hole in the otherwise flawless, perfectly smooth mental construction. It was a small one, and he had not made it, the point of the hole being clear as crystal. "Well," Lilith said, gratefully, after reaching the always disheveled-looking Legion Master, "you'll have fun now. I'm going to go be strategically somewhere else." You would think she would have gotten used to answering questions by now, the ancient being hiding behind the cast-out Angel Lucifer's name said, as he gestured to the empty benches to his left. "Since you are here now, Care to sit while we talk, Norman? This might take a while." The female creator chuckled as she walked away, leaving the host exorcist to stand next to the single most evil individual in all of creation according to his own religion. Involuntarily, the exorcist's gloved hand rose slowly to the handle of the blessed dagger hanging from his belt. He knew enough about beings of spirit to know killing them required a bladed weapon and the right litanies. The old being hung his head to sigh and chuckle. "Go ahead and try if you think it would work. I am sure your superiors will forget your most heroic death after the moment they hear of it." Or, he paused to look up to meet the gaze of the individual glaring at him. "We can talk like civilized individuals." Norman lowered his hand as he moved to sit down out of arms, reach for lack of anything better to do. He could try to rid the universe of evil, but even if he did, he knew he would never leave this ship alive. "I don't know why she's making me talk to you. You're just going to lie and tempt me from the true faith. Your kind always does." The exorcist just wanted to be alone with his thoughts after an angel of his faith had told him his life, and everything he knew was over. Despite his current attitude towards his faith, some things were just too ingrained in his mind to be discarded. A knowing smile crossed the Legion Master's face as he watched Lilith join an ongoing ball game on the fake turf of the arena field. The Legion Master sat down and said, "If such is your belief, then why did you ask her to explain some things to you on your ride up from the planet? I mean, if you already know the unequivocal truth with 100% accuracy, that I will do nothing but be deceitful, then you already know the truth of reality, and this conversation is pointless." Norman sighed. "I see where your angel gets his sarcasm from." "Yes, though Baphomet tends to exaggerate for the sake of being the class comedian. Ask what you will of me, and I will answer as best I can." Norman had one question he liked to use to gauge the new acolytes coming into the seminary schools. He decided to use it and asked, "What is the purpose of creation?" He meant the three-dimensional universe he was in, because all true sons and daughters of the faith knew the other universes, and dimensions were tricks from false gods. Hell if I know, and you're conveniently forgetting the other parts of creation with your question, priest. Would you settle for "I was lonely and wanted someone to talk to"? "What?" the exorcist blurted out. He had not expected that answer, and the horrible pain and anguish he felt in those words chilled his soul. The being of spirit sitting next to him truly believed what he had just said. He believed he had created something all faithful sons and daughters of the Church knew Elohim had made. Lucifer continued, "I knew what I wanted, what I needed to stay sane in the perpetual, a stimulus void of my beginning. If I could only find it and start molding it, then maybe I could work it until it produced results, regardless of how long it took to make. Such results were nowhere near instantaneous mind, but just having something to do to stave off the madness was a blessing. Well, at least I think it worked. If I were truly mad, I would have no way of knowing if I were, would I? Perhaps I am the byproduct of random chance, or perhaps some sadistic bastard made me only to watch me suffer. All I know is one day I had awareness along with all of the just so wonderful issues which accompany it. Naturally, I then began tinkering with what I found around me, because to do nothing would have ruined me. Since there was nothing around me, I was forced to pull bits and pieces off of my soul to give me something to work with." Norman's brow furrowed as he tried to find something wrong with the evil one's words, and he found nothing other than the glaring, obvious lie. Trying another tactic, he asked, "Frigg said no one is allowed to worship you." The being hiding behind the name Lucifer held up his hand, quickly, and added, "That is not what he said. If an individual wishes to offer praise or worship, they are free to do so. However, I do not demand it, or even want or condone such actions. In fact, I find the whole notion of your mortal worship stupid." He looked and saw the confusion on the priest's face, and shook his head. "Look at it this way, Norman. If I placed you in a room with 1,000,000 small children to be their teacher, how quickly would you begin to pull your hair out at the incessant, never-ending noise and questions? Now, multiply that by the near infinitum of creation, and I think you just might begin to get my point. Just being yourself is a debt that I can never repay you." "Then why do you force your citizens to toil?" Norman asked. This conversation was not going as he had planned. If you claim to want to repay them for some obscure service, then why not institute the values of the true faith? "And damn my people to live in abject poverty and ignorance. No thank you." "Blasphemy," the exorcist countered. "Our citizens have everything they could ever want." The Legion Master held out his hand to rock it back and forth in a so-so gesture. "Yes, except for the freedom of choice to decide your own lives. Tell me, priest, when you go home to your small 20 by 20 apartment, which looks like everyone else's, with the exact same items inside, except for those crossed scimitar swords over the fresher, and your little potted sargassum tree, what do you do? Do you kick your shoes off and grab a beer? Maybe even, I don't know, watch The Hollow?" "Of course," Norman answered, feeling offended at being called a clone, and terrified this being somehow knew what was in his apartment. "Do you not as well?" "Sometimes, Norman. Sometimes. What else do you do for fun?" "Aye." The exorcist trailed off as he worked on recalling his daily routine. The Legion Master pressed the issue. "Do you go to church?" "Almost daily," Norman instantly replied. "It is the duty of all faithful to offer up prayer and supplication to the divine. Even though you haven't believed those words for over 200 years. Lucifer rubbed his face and leaned back to rest his elbows on the steel bench seat behind him. He watched several mortals attempt to tackle Lilith as she ran with a ball. Only the mortals were drug across the turf in a knot of hooting laughter, like the children's game with a plastic barrel and small animals with hooks instead of hands. Since she was obviously not going down, everyone on both teams piled on to laugh and struggle as she walked around with the piled-on soldiers. "Why do you go?" he asked finally. "Is it not because the more you go, the more benefits you receive? My younger brother's angels require prayer to feed them, since Elohim is incapable of doing so like me. What has been created in the Host Ascendency is what eventually always happens in societies run by angelic beings. It is a system in which favors are bought and sold based on undelivered promises." The ancient being turned to stare at the priest, who felt helpless in the gaze and could not look away. "Your angels are professional politicians, Norman. They promise you people everything, and then give the minimum to placate the masses because it is economically advantageous to do so." "Not true. The logistical issue of food, clothes, and houses for the millions of daily converts to the true faith are—" Lucifer silenced him with a stab of a bladed hand in the air. "Is pure crap, and you know it, boy. You are a senior exorcist, not a remote colony priest. You know the real numbers as well as I." The next words terrified the mortal man, as no one could have known his thoughts. You did not put a last bolt through your door when Matthias delivered your Grand Master's summons. Why? Oh, wait, that's right. You knew it would take months to fix your door. How could you know that? Norman asked, as he looked at the ancient being in horror. The Legion Master just smiled and ignored the question. You are a senior exorcist with near 3 centuries of service. If it takes you that long to have maintenance, fix your belongings, then how long does it take for the average citizen living in the slums, not affiliated with any church, to get theirs fixed? Have you ever visited those places? I have, and the people there live like vermin, because what they have to offer is not good enough to the high and mighty angels which run your nation. If a society like that is what is required to be worshipped by mortals, then I refuse to be a part of it. Norman was starting to tremble a little as he looked down at his shaking hands. Your Legion murders innocent people in the quest for never-ending expansion. We do not do that in the Host. Of course not, since we do your bleeding for you before we cede the majority of conquered territory to the closest Creator-run nation after taking the mortals who wish to join us, with us. You call me a murderer for killing those which refuse to join, and you would be correct. But before you get your rope out to hang me, have you ever witnessed wars where both sides are using the truly scary technology all of us creators have hidden away? Think Norman. All non-Legion angels require mortal prayers to sustain them. Do you truly believe your people's leaders would not go to war with your neighbors to gain more converts? You know they would. The moment one Creator-run nation began to lose such a war, they would dust off the forbidden technologies and start erasing whole solar systems off of the map, maybe even some galaxies too. They would do so because their people dying in droves diminishes their power. The Legion Master paused, as if reliving bad memories. Priest, the purpose of the Legion is not universal domination. The purpose of the Legion is to keep the wars of my children from spiraling out of control. It is a hard thing, and an unfortunately wholly necessary one which my soldiers do willingly, because if they do not, then their families will be caught in the crossfire. Now it is my turn to ask a question. Would you really condemn my people, all of them, every last one, for the supposed sin of not believing in the right thing according to your government? Would you really condemn an infinite number of people in all other universes for something which was not their fault, and for something they had no choice or control over? A faith the majority of them have never heard of. As the words of the Creator sank home, Norman hung his head in shame. No, he murmured softly. I can't do that. But your faith will, and does. Would you be able to condemn a mother, father, and 2 little girls who grew up in a society who has never heard of the Host Ascendency, and then is thus ignorant of the dictates of the true faith? They have no idea who you are, and for thousands of generations they have followed their own people's faith, which, might I add, also claims to be the only right choice. Would you pass judgment on them for simply being ignorant of your teachings? Norman's guts felt cold as his conscience wrestled with his indoctrination. How? How could I judge them if they do not know? The Legion Master was merciless as he twisted the knife deeper. Michael will. He would burn that family alive on pyres if they do not immediately fall on their knees and worship him for being right. All of your archangels besides Jophiel would salivate at the chance to burn those little girls alive for the sin of ignorance, for the supposed sins of their parents. Would you, Norman Sebastian Adelson Kant, burn that family alive because they did not believe the way you think they should? How could you ask me to do that? The Legion Master's tone was like steel. "You must kill them. It is written in your holy book that the only good heretic is a dead heretic. Your faith is the only righteous one out there, the only right and correct one. It is not your fault those girls' parents were ignorant. It is not your fault those 2 girls are living in sin. If they will not follow the one true faith, then their immortal souls are at peril, and the only sure way to save them is to take the matter out of their hands and do it yourself. Come on, you're a priest of the most holy Elohim, for all the gods' sake. This should be easy for you. Save their souls, Norman. Do not let them fall to inevitable corruption." His tone became sour. Job chapter 3, verse 12. "Flesh is weak and corruptible when not filled with surfeit of faith. Better the flesh be cleansed and the eternal soul saved, then let a man fall to eternal damnation." Norman was visibly shaking as he stood up to scream, "I won't murder them." God was inexorable as he looked to the exorcist with burning silver-white eyes. "You already have. 4 times as an acolyte, 19 times as an exorcist, and 73 times as a senior exorcist. What is a few more to add to the body count, eh? A body is just a flesh bag. The soul is the important part, according to your faith." People were staring now at the commotion, but all Norman could focus on were the 2 flaming silver eyes of the being who was sitting and staring at him, the being who was giving every indication of judging him and the terrible things he had done as a man. He wanted to argue, to scream and say the being was lying as only a false god could. However, Norman knew the Creator sitting in judgment knew of his sins, for he could feel it in his very soul. Norman stammered. He fell to the metal bench seat, sobbing as his legs lost their strength. He buried his face in his gloved hands, ashamed at what he had done in the service of his God. "I do not want to be a monster anymore," he said. "I just want to help those who need it." "So do I." The Legion Master agreed. His tone had switched from one of wrath and judgment to eternal sadness. "There are evil people who need killing in my creation, Norman, but those are generally in the minority when compared to the whole. I do not wish to have to do the necessary things we do either, but if I do not, then countless more will be killed as the inevitable wars go beyond anything you can imagine. Before you ask, no, inaction only makes it worse. Hence my never-ending torment and worst conundrum. You may have guessed by now that Lucifer is not my real name, nor is it the name the old creators like Jehovah keep using. I have labored for so long, child, so long, as I try to ease the suffering of my great work, to no avail. Nothing I do ever stops this madness. I do not believe anything ever will, so long as free will exists." The exorcist was silent for a long moment until saying, "There must be a way." God snorted, as if amused. He said, "If you could find a way where I have failed, I would be eternally in your debt. Here, let me show what I have tried, so you can see if I missed something." Norman tried to look away from the ancient being as the primal part of his brain screamed at him that he was about to be dragged into something beyond his comprehension. The animalistic part of his mind was not wrong, as Norman's mortal mind could not process the near infinitum of rapid-fire memories which came as what felt like a solid wave. The exorcist screamed in his own mind from the pain and overwhelming emotions which threatened to consume his very existence. The worst of all was the bitter hunger, which felt like he was trapped in the worst blizzard imaginable, freezing to death with no clothes on, yet being unable to die. All of his emotions were heightened to a degree where love and lust felt as if they were going to rip his heart out of his chest and tear it to little pieces. Rage and wrath burned his muscles with strength bordering on holy fire. Despair and sorrow so strong made him wish to never have been born at all, clamped down like an impossibly heavy lead blanket. The worst was the loneliness the being across from him felt as everything around him died eventually. Yet he was forced to continue on. Never ending, never ceasing. It was enough to make him go mad. Norman saw the beginning of creation as God tried and failed to make things work as he wished. Everything was a failure, and everything descended into madness. Rules governing how universes acted let cataclysmic events unfold. Ideas were scrapped. New ideas replaced the old ones and were put into action. They failed as well. On and on, God kept trying to make and set rules which would allow him the one thing he desired more than anything: companions. Someone to share the never-ending, bitter loneliness of his existence. After a seeming infinite number of attempts, he found the right set of conditions which allowed life, as twisted and weird as it was, for Norman to comprehend it. That life then grew sentient consciousnesses and the ability to form cultures. There was still a problem with creation, as it was ever incessantly tweaked and perfected. It was stagnant. Nothing changed unless the Maker wanted it to change. The Exorcist felt God reach a pivotal decision, the decision of allowing free will and random chance into the great experiment. God was about to act on his decision when Norman felt a hand with 10 fingers touch the top of his head. "Better stop it here," the Legion Master said, in a voice unlike the one Norman had just been talking to. "After this point, it gets, shall we say, complicated. I do not think you are at a point yet where you could process the rest and stay sane." Suddenly, the torrent of experience ended, and the Exorcist was back in the bleachers as if nothing had happened. He looked around wildly, and none of the people around him seemed to have witnessed anything out of the ordinary. He saw Creator Lilith looking at him in concern, as if she knew what he had just experienced. "I think you get my predicament better now," the Legion Master continued in his normal baritone. He was, however, staring at the turf with a 1,000-yard stare, as if those memories were threatening to swallow him whole. Norman's heart was pounding in his chest like a jackhammer, and the adrenaline crash made his muscles misfire into shaky spasms. His clothing was fully soaked with the sour, sickly smell of feverish sweat. "Merciful Father," he protested, "is that how you live every day?" "Yes," God answered. "It's worse because your mortal mind can only process so much data at a time. But I endure it for your sake because, as I said, I am lonely. I would far rather endure the storm you just caught a glimpse of than be alone in the stimulus void of my awakening." The pair sat in silence for a long time, watching the games being played by the mortals and Creator Lilith. It was hard enough for Norman to come to terms with his whole life being one big fat lie, and he had already been harboring those suspicions for over 2 centuries, and he figured he would start at the root of the problem. The conditioning of a lifetime told him he was being tricked, but he felt the truth of the experience he had just gone through in his soul. The being sitting across from him had not shown him a lie. He said, "Host religion states you are this great evil, and you may very well be. But why is that if you do what you do out of love?" "Supposedly," Elileth said. "His Holiness, Creator Elohim, needed something to bring his religion together." The Legion Master regarded the Exorcist and nodded. "Sound first question to ask," he said. "Elohim came to me long ago seeking advice on how to stop his religious system from falling apart." Back then, there were so many competing factions they threatened to fragment the entirety of the Host Ascendency. I asked my younger brother if there was anything in his religion the scattered remnants could agree on, and he said not really besides him. I volunteered to be viewed as I do now to help cement your people together. The old being then shrugged. And for any religion to work, there must be a great evil one with minions, so that the regular folk will have a moral system for defining good. While such things are really more of a shade of grey, on paper there must be clear-cut definitions, because mortals are mortals regardless of where they come from. I get around this in the Legion by having our churches conduct more philosophical discussions on the nature of myself. We have no great evil one or ones, so in the discussions the people set their own black and white parameters based on their own myriad beliefs and cultures. Norman tried to wrap his head around a church service of people sitting in chairs having arguments over beliefs while trying to explain their viewpoints. He shook his head, as the concept was too alien for him. Pausing, he then thought about what it would be like to return to a service as he was used to after having the fortune to have met so-called God and glimpse a fraction of his being. He shook his head as he hugged his arms to his chest as if cold. This could still all be some trick from an incredibly powerful being. He swore he heard a mental snort in his mind from that line of thinking. His head ached, and he began to rub his temples in frustration. The Legion Master laughed as he said, "You begin to see why our ways seem so strange now. Once you know or have seen the object of your supposed faith, how can you ever stand to listen to a tired old windbag tell you how you should think and feel about it, especially if said individual has no clue of what the hell they are talking about, and you do? Could you listen to one of your evangelists trying to explain me after what I just showed you, and then believe him with all of your being?" "No," the exorcist replied. His mind was racing as old beliefs threatened to take root again in the forefront of his thoughts. Did he really see God? Did I really see what I thought I saw? Or was that some massive psychic trick? His training kicked in and he banished all thoughts not germane to the current circumstances and asked the question which had been bothering him since he was first told by the legate. "The others keep saying demons are trying to find my son. Why?" "I'm sorry, but that is my fault. Have you heard about the death of creator Amun-Ra of the Empire?" Norman nodded. The Empire was the largest non-Legion nation in the universe Norman was currently in. No one really knew for sure, since no one ever bothered to count the slave population, which easily met the definition of quadrillions, since the population of the Empire was so vast as to be uncountable. There was a report to those of a high enough rank that a false god had been killed, Norman said. Some of us were told in case we needed to mobilize to protect the shipping lanes if they fractured into civil war. "I killed him." "You?" Norman asked. "Yes. Ra needed to be removed immediately, as he was starting to befriend certain nations, which are at odds with the established status quo. By that I mean those who want to enslave us and rule over what is left." The Legion Master paused as if debating what to say. "When a soul's physical vessel is done, the soul returns to a place we of the Legion like to call the library. Your host would call it paradise. Very, very, very few creators can make a soul, Norman. 98% of all of the souls in the entirety of creation come from myself. I place far too much value on them to be squandered by living the farcical notion of just one life. Your soul is recycled and allowed to continue on gaining new experiences. It is put back in circulation if you are still not following me." "Reincarnation?" Norman asked. The ancient being rocked his hand in a so-so gesture. The term is apt, but it is not the endless cycle in the search for enlightenment, like the mortals of my brother Vishnu's Brahmanavata are told. I did not consume Amun-Ra's soul, though perhaps I should have. I filed it away, in case he could be salvaged to help us fight against our adversaries in the upcoming war. This was a mistake. By living there, he figured out the rough location of the library of souls, and he caused so many problems I was forced to kick him out. The Legion Master paused to shake his head. Before you tell me you told me so, yes, I agree, now I should have killed him. What does this have to do with my son? I still don't even know if I have one. The Legion Master let out a morose chuckle and said, were I to just kick Amun-Ra out of the library, he would be free to build himself a new physical vessel and run away. Your son was just being born, and I needed a place to put that monster to buy time to think on what to do. Excuse me? Norman asked, as he felt like a bucket of ice water was just dumped into his veins. Let me finish, please. Plus, I saw, and still do, see great potential in you, Norman. Ra's soul must be kept out of the hands of those who would seek to rule with absolute authority. Being born a mortal makes a new personality, which will not remember much of who or what it was before, though he may remember fragmented bits and pieces. Any being of spirit could devour his soul and recall the totality of the soul's memories. That is bad, in case you were not paying attention. If there were no new souls to be placed into mortal vessels, then other things could move in and take their place. Or I would be burdened with making a vast amount of new souls, which would diminish me at a time when we really cannot afford that right now. There is a coming war with Baal and his followers, which will encompass the majority of creation. Norman's mind was working overtime as he processed the insane-sounding words he had just been told. His military training kicked in, and he once again banished questions and doubt because he was afraid of what would happen to him if he dwelled on the matter for too long. If what I have been told is true, he said, speaking slowly to force his thoughts to the here and now, your military is massive. Why would you care about any of this? Everything has a limit, Norman, even me. And my military will be severely diminished by fighting internal civil wars from an event of my own making, which Lilith can tell you more about later. Which is all part of Baal's plan, of course. He cannot be allowed to consume all of the souls in the library. And if he wins? Norman asked. I do not know much about this individual. The Legion Master was silent for a long moment before saying, Baal believes in a creation where individuals are allowed to pursue their own individual pleasures whenever they wish, however they wish. Granted, they must all worship and offer sacrifices to him to be allowed to do as they please. To be the top animal in his society, one must do ever increasingly depraved acts for his blessings. The ancient being held out his hand for Norman to take. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I will show you what will come to pass if he is allowed to run the show. Norman was hesitant to be shown anything else, but when he was shown, he wished to all that was holy he had not asked that particular question. What he saw was just as broken as some of the failed creations he had been shown previously. Except those creations were not broken on purpose.